So I thought we would take a look at some of the stuff that we've learned over the last couple of years. It's been a long road, as you know. It has started with, and I think everything unfolded exactly the way that it should. It started with just seeing what was being painted in these cathedrals without knowing anything behind it, and then going through the process of doing the research and finding out why I was seeing what I was seeing. That actually served well in a couple of ways. Number one, it confirms that what we saw in these cathedrals actually was what we saw in these cathedrals. It wasn't something where we went out, researched all the information first, and then went into the cathedrals and say, see, here's what I see, here's all this stuff proves it, because nobody would pay attention to it then. But because we saw the images first and didn't have any of the information behind them, even though people at first said, oh, you're crazy or what have you, as time unfolded and as the research unfolded, when we began to understand now why we were actually seeing what we're seeing in these cathedrals and how it all tied back together again. Let's take a look at some of the evidence. The first image that I saw was inside Karlskirche that we see right here. Karlskirche. And if you want, take a look at all of these different images, we see Yahweh in every one of these. But if you also notice these things that I have highlighted in blue, these are the certain archetypes that make up the clouds that surround this area. And if you can see, there's a crescent moon on the left side on every one of these, and there's this figure with his arm stretched out, this figure right here on the right side on every one of these. So you have this one here slightly lowered and to the left that you see right here in every one of these, and this figure slightly up and to the right on all of these. And what that turned out to be was the Orion Nebula, but it turned out to be the Orion Nebula in infrared. So we have the Chapel of Versailles, 1600. We have St. Mary's Cathedral, 1500s. Assenkirch in the 1700s, and Karlskirche in 1737, all depicting the same symbolism that can be confirmed in the Orion Nebula. And we see this representation of Yahweh. Now this has taken us through science, this has taken us through ancient philosophy and everything. But then we found this one here. And we found Michelangelo actually painted the Orion Nebula. But we all already know that he painted a brain. What was the significance? A long time ago we didn't know. All we knew was that, at least most people knew, that in his painting he painted a brain. But it was only until I discovered this that I knew that he had painted the Orion Nebula. That was a very important piece to connect together. Because if he painted a brain and he painted the Orion Nebula, which he clearly did, as you can see right here, the images contained all the way through show the signature of the Orion Nebula. It's like face recognition. It's like fuzzy face recognition. You can clearly see it. And there's not anybody that this will not stand up to. There's not any scrutiny that this will not stand up to and win. So, this gives us a very important piece to the puzzle. And why this hasn't become the most outstanding discovery that we've seen in our time yet, I don't know. Probably because people just are still afraid to see what is in front of them. But back then it was just he painted the brain and he painted the Orion Nebula. We didn't really know why all of that connected together. But that's one of the reasons why I took us all the way through Plato, through Socrates, through Neoplatonism, through the understanding of the demiurge, through the Gnostic texts, and everything. And what we discovered is we discovered that in the Platonic description of the creation of the universe, that the first thing that is created in the visible universe is the demiurge, and the demiurge represents mind. So, for example, if we come over here and we take a look at the demiurge, The demiurge is another name for mind or nous, and it is the firstborn over all creation. And we also get this from Colossians 1:15. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. When it says it's the image of the invisible God, this is actually referring to Platonic philosophy. Because Platonic philosophy starts with the invisible world. It starts with the invisible world of archetypes. It's an image, say, for example, if you have to think about an archetype and what that means, think about this perfect representation of whatever this image is. But it doesn't exist in the physical world. It only exists as an idea. So if you envision it in your mind, then it's an archetype. But as you know, it doesn't exist in the physical world yet. It's in your head. It's an archetype that exists in your head. And so we might think of the first God, and when I say the first God, what I really mean is all is one. It's just that what happens is this one emanates from itself, and it creates, the first thing that happens is just like the Bible says right here, it creates the Son, which is the first image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation, and it's referring to something cosmic here. Now, as we begin to discover this, we know that demiurge is mind. And if we take a look at the etymology, because man was created in the image of God, if we take a look at the etymology for man, plural man, sometimes connected to root men, to think, see mind. So mind is the representation of man. That's the intelligible animal that was created. And when we understand when Plato was talking about the creation of the universe and the form of the universe was going to be an intelligible animal. And so he created a sphere, and this sphere turns out to be the way he would create man's skull, and so forth. Because what it turns out to be is that the universe is actually the construction of a human mind in different layers. And so the Orion Nebula represents that first creation of man. Right here it says, more probably man, human being, is a secularized divine name from Manus, believed to be the progenitor of the human race. Manus, the mind thinker, the archetype of man, which Manly Hall showed us, but we also can see in Plato's philosophy, as well as what we see later in Plotinus, what we see from Philo, and what we see from these other guys, including what we see in the Bible and everything else, and what we see in the Gnostic texts. Now, we also have other images that tie this stuff together as well. The demiurge, the picture of the demiurge. The demiurge was supposed to be a representation of Sophia, and Sophia was supposed to be the representation of wisdom, but the Gnostics twisted it. But here's their image of Yaldabaoth, which is the demiurge, which is the representation of mind. And she surrounded it with a luminous cloud, and she placed a throne for it in the middle of the cloud, and she called its name Yaldabaoth. And this is the representation of mind, which is the demiurge. So what Michelangelo actually created was he created the Christ in this cloud. This cloud is the demiurge. The demiurge is actually Christ, and it's the firstborn over all creation. So we have all of these different names for it. We have the demiurge, we have the Logos, we have Christ, we have mind, we have Nous. We have all these different names for it, but it all represents the firstborn over all creation. And it represents a collective unity of all of humanity. It represents, as everything is created from it, we all become fragments of it. And so this is the reason why Michelangelo painted a brain. Many people don't know this, and many people don't also know that they flipped the brain in the wrong direction when they tried to look at this thing. If you take a look at the cerebellum here and the occipital lobe, the occipital lobe and the cerebellum, if you notice, they're divided on his little cloud as well, too, here. And if you notice this area right here, this fold that you see on top of his, that's the fornix, and this is the thalamus, And this area, this crease that you see coming back over this way, that's the midbrain. A lot of people have flipped it the wrong way, but when we take a look in the Kabbalist text, for example, it doesn't matter if we go to the Kabbalists, it doesn't matter if we go to the Bible, it doesn't matter if we go to the Gnostics, it doesn't matter if we take a look at Plato, it doesn't matter if we look at all of these. The reason he painted the brain is because the brain is the firstborn over all creation, and it represents mind, and it represents the demiurge, and it represents the creator God. So it's perfectly understandable that in the creation of Adam, he would paint the demiurge, which represents mind and represents Christ, the firstborn over all creation. So it makes totally logical sense now why he would do that. And if we take a look inside Bible Hub, as we've been looking at all this stuff, we find that we've been given even more examples of this same kind of thing, where Jesus in the cosmos, and it shows us Jesus on top of the Orion Nebula. Notice how it says wisdom? Because Sophia was the representation of wisdom in the Gnostics, and the firstborn over all creation, which is the demiurge, was supposed to be a reflection of wisdom, and which it actually is, because it is the image of a human brain. So why did Michelangelo paint the Orion Nebula, and why did he paint a brain? Because he's painting the demiurge, which has been confirmed across culture, which is confirmed as the Logos and the Christ, the firstborn over all creation, and we can clearly see that he's painted it here. And it represents the brain, and it represents man, because the etymology for man is mind, the symbol of Manus, the mind thinker. So this is why Michelangelo painted a brain. Now, why this particular image that we see here, and even confirmed in higher detail here, up very close in this image, why this hasn't made it to mainstream so far, I have no idea why. But it's probably because a lot of people are just in denial. But if you want the truth about what's going on here, now you can see that all this stuff that we've looked at over the last couple of years has confirmed itself through all of the ancient cultures, whether it be Plato, whether it be Plotinus, whether it be Philo, whether it be Socrates, whether it be the Bible, whether it be the Gnostics, whether it be Kabbalah, whether it be, you name it. All of it confirms exactly what we see here, even ancient Egyptian. And the symbol of universal mind, the vision of Hermes, everything. And it all points us back to the Orion Nebula. So this is the reason why Michelangelo painted a brain. And this is the reason why he painted the Orion Nebula. It represents the Christ. It represents the firstborn over all creation. The visible image of the invisible God. Y'all take care. I'll talk to you soon.